We? We.
What up, my fellow NBA lovers? This is your guy, Marcellus Ease, and this whole Clippers fiasco reminds me of the Trojan War story, in which at the time it was viewed as the impenetrable city of Troy could not be taken over, but eventually it fell to the Greeks in the most unlikely scenario, by a Trojan horse appearing to be a gift. And in this case, Jokic is definitely a Trojan horse to the Clippers right here. Now, he looked like Neo from the Matrix when he started seeing all these lines. His court vision was so clear. The way he was looking guys off after being in the pick and roll and just finding guys open for three. It was insane. Doc Rivers couldn't make major adjustments. The Clippers, unfortunately, right now, they didn't even have a point guard to control the pace to slow that down a bit, and they eventually fell. Now, Steve Ballmer, the Clippers owner, has a long summer ahead of him because the next season is going to be delayed, and he's going to have plenty of time to think about his next moves. The Clippers have spent a lot of draft picks getting Paul George, and eventually, as we've seen, that didn't work out too well. And also, they could have a lot of potential losses. Montrezl Harrell, he's about to be 26. He's going to be looking to get paid. And Marcus Morris, he's going to be looking to get paid. He's 31. So they just may end up losing these two guys. And I'm pretty sure all the baby treatment Kawhi's been getting under the Clippers, because even after this loss, Doc Rivers was asked to drop down some criticism on Kawhi and what faults he had in the game, and Doc was trying to deflect. So there's been a lot of babying. But you guys check out this segment, and every once in a while, check in.
On all subjects, but let's get to it, y'all. Is trouble brewing, excuse me if I could speak, with the Clippers, who are no longer in the bubble after the Nuggets sent them packing? So during Game 2, Montrezl Harrell, Paul George get into a heated exchange during a timeout. According to Yahoo Sports' Chris Haynes, early in the second quarter, a struggling George had committed 2 careless turnovers in less than a minute. The second mishap, a half-court pass to Montrezl Harrell that got picked off by Jamal Murray seconds later. Clippers called timeout. Harrell approached.
Isn't that interesting? As soon as they invite the wives over, all this type of fuckery goes on. I mean, Jimmy Butler, everyone got to pay attention to what he's doing. He invited none of the family. He said this is strictly business. And this guy has been taking care of, what he got to do. He's been busting ass. Guys got to pay attention.
Teammate about this and his lack of accountability set off the NBA Sixth Man of the Year, Max. Tell me this, are you confident that this Clippers roster, as presently constructed, can ever win a chip?
No, I'm not. Not after what I saw in Game 7 and actually throughout the bubble, especially from this Clippers team. But they never really got it going fully throughout the regular season either. And look, Kawhi Leonard, he choked in Game 7. And so much of his reputation or his standing, as far as I'm concerned, is based on his...
Yeah, Kawhi Leonard in Game 7, I don't know what's going on there. I mean, Paul George shot 1 free throw and Kawhi Leonard shot 0. And he only shot 5 free throws in Game 6. I mean, I don't know what's going on. If this guy has an injury bug, but Kawhi Leonard is definitely not LeBron James where he could play that point forward. They definitely need someone like Kyle Lowry, that type of point guard to control the pace and to set guys up. I mean, they had Kawhi Leonard making passes, hitting the open man for Lou Williams. I mean, if you're relying on Lou Williams to hit shots, Reggie Jackson to hit shots in the Game 7, you're in trouble.
Postseason play, that I can't have him the number 1 player in the world after doing that, right? But Kawhi Leonard's been an extremely reliable, to say the least, playoff performer.
I mean, look who's setting him up right there. Montrezl Harrell. I mean, it's not good, man. The way he's getting set up, he's not even really open like that. And he has to create on his own. That's not what Kawhi does. He has a history of having point guards. He had Tony Parker. He had Kyle Lowry. I mean, Steve Ballmer's going to have to make a move here.
Throughout his career, before he was a superstar, while he was a star and an emerging superstar, and then since he's been a superstar, this last series notwithstanding, which for the most part he was excellent in, actually, but choked in the moment of truth. There's no two ways about it. So I'm not worried about Kawhi, really. But he obviously needs support. And his Robin in this Batman and Robin scenario, Paul George, has not been able to turn the corner in the playoffs. He is consistently, Stephen A. mentioned, hitting the backboard on that three-point shot. Stephen A., I had the same reaction. You was like, what?
Paul George, man, he got to be careful, man. Especially, I know now everyone wants to bring awareness to mental illness, but he got to be careful, man, because saying stuff like that when you're going after a championship and you going into the battlefield, your opponents don't have to know these type of things, man. Come on.
Oh, you and they look, and it's been like that throughout his career when you've needed Paul George most. So, since Paul George is that guy, they need a third guy because it's not like you have two MVP caliber.
I mean, when you look at all these highlights here, no one's really getting set up. I mean, Paul George right there in that last clip, he has an open shot, but for the most part, I see Harold just give and go for like a 1 second open shot. Like it's weird. They don't really have a setup, man. I mean, Patrick Beverly is not that guy, and Lou Williams is not that guy either. Lou Williams is sort of an ISO guy. Like I said, man, they have two forwards in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard playing point forward, and it's clearly obvious that these guys can't do that. They're gonna have to get a point guard. It doesn't have to be an all-star point guard, but they got to get someone to dictate and control the pace of the game.
Players when you need the most, the way Denver did with Jokic and Jamal Murray, the way the Lakers do with LeBron and AD. You need another guy, Drew Holiday or something like that. It's not like every team doesn't want Drew Holiday, but you need a guy who can create off the dribble, get his own shot, set up teammates, and defend. You need a real star. Whether or not it's a superstar, it's a star, and maybe a guy who's a superstar under pressure if you have Paul George.
They don't need another superstar. I mean, we got to stop with that. They need someone that's actually going to fit and understand their role. They just need a point guard. That's it. I mean, this whole thing that, you already got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. You don't need another mega superstar on top of that again. That narrative has to stop. I mean, it's clearly obvious this team was stacked on paper, but it ended up not working because of chemistry. The chemistry has got to be down pat. I mean, look at the Toronto Raptors. Look at the Miami Heat. These teams are not on paper looking crazy, but the chemistry, you see it.
Here's the problem, guys. You probably need to move Paul George to get him. But Drew Holiday and Kawhi is not enough to win a championship, right? What would you get for Paul George? So then you think, okay, are there enough other pieces on this team to move to bring in a guy like that? Does the combination of Montrezl Harrell and Patrick Beverly in trades, right? Because they don't make a lot of money considering the way they produce. Can that get?
They're about to. I tell you that. Montrezl Harrell, he's 26, about to hit that unrestricted market. He's going to get paid somewhere.
Do something like a Drew Holiday or a third wheel, who's really would be a second wheel under pressure, to pair with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George? If the answer is yes to that, then you fundamentally changed your roster. So I think as presently constructed, no, they need to make a major change, something like what I just outlined.
That major change may also be the coaching issue right here, because Doc Rivers, he definitely didn't make adjustments, but Doc Rivers has a long history. I mean, just since 2008 when he won that championship with the Celtics, he's underachieved. I know Chris Paul had major injuries in the playoffs, costing them a couple of series, but this has been very underwhelming with Doc Rivers there. It's just a lot of meltdowns with the Clippers. It's just a lot of underachieving. I mean, this is like pretty much the icing on the cake. Steve Ballmer is going to have to really, evaluate Doc. I know Doc is very respected by players and people throughout the league, but they're really going to have to evaluate this guy right now. And I believe that's really catching them off guard. But once again, it's going to be a long off season, so you never know.
I disagree with you, Max. I think I take a totally different view than you on this, from the standpoint that I think because of the way that they performed in the last 3 games of this series, which ultimately sent them home, I think you keep them together. I don't think they necessarily need anything new in order to win a chip. You keep Doc Rivers, you keep that coaching staff, you keep every single one of those players, even though Montrezl Harrell is approaching free agency and he's got some explaining to do as to why he only averaged 2.6 rebounds per game in this series when Jokic averaged 13 rebounds along with his 24 points on 51% shooting.
That's because Jokic is stretching the floor like that. He's taking this guy off his position. I mean, he's a threat all the way around. Jokic is a threat for passing, shooting threes, everything, getting rebounds. And that's the difference between the European system and the American system. A guy could be 4'1". They're going to teach him how to post up, how to pass, how to do everything, how to rebound. And a guy could be freaking 20 feet tall. They're going to teach him how to post up, pass like a point guard, shoot threes, do everything. And Jokic, man, is a product of that system. These guys do it all for months at a time. Then they end up playing just one game, and then they'll go and practice again months at a time. It's pretty much bearing fruits right now. You're seeing it.
And nearly 40% from three-point range. I think that, obviously Harold has something to prove. The biggest reason that I think that you keep them together is a couple of things. I think that Kawhi, being the superstar that he is, still a top 5 player in the game. I think he has a lot to make up for, considering the fact that this was his first, venture into being that face of a franchise, that number one option with the expectations draped on his shoulders.
And also not having a point guard at all.
Come into the Clippers organization. Well, there's but so many games I'm going to play. There's but so many practices that I'm going to attend. I'm going to be in shape, make no mistake about it, but I'm going to show up with the practice when I want to show up. I'm going to miss practices when I feel I need to miss practices, etc., etc.
I mean, pay attention to who's setting up Kawhi, man. I mean, you got to ask yourself, who's really setting up some of these guys?
The lead of a franchise, you set a very, very bad tone. If you're Lou Williams, boy, do you have a lot of making up to do. The best part of you in this series was your post-game press conference in the aftermath of losing Game 7, because he was very eloquent and candid in his assessment of what transpired, but he only averaged 10 points this series, and he was horrific from three-point range, shoot like 14%. That's not Lou Williams. This is a 2-time sixth man of the year. This brother is a star scoring the basketball. He is a professional scorer. There was no excuse for him to be as anemic as he was, other than the fact that clearly you didn't really want to be there. That's why they got a new nickname for you, Lemon Pepper Lou.
Nah, I mean, I don't think that's the case, but to rely on Lou Williams the way they did in just Game 7, when you seen Lou coming off the bench in the second half, in the later part of the second half, just him taking the shots he was taking, you knew things were bad offensively. And even Reggie Jackson, you saw when Doc Rivers called on him, you knew it was over then.
Understand why that transpired. You've got some making up to do. And then, of course, there's Paul George. We can't ignore the situation involving Paul George. I'm here to tell you, Max, one of the nicest dudes you'll ever want to meet in your life. Impossible to root against. He is a star in this league, but nevertheless, boy, did he not show up. It was Brick City. It was a straight choke job on his part as well. And what the biggest thing about Paul George that he needs to pay attention to, Paul George is in danger. Are you ready for this, Max? He's in danger of becoming the second coming of Dwight Howard.
Yeah, a lot of the shots right there, man, it's just really bad right there. But, I mean, as you can see from the highlights, he needs to get set up. It's clearly obvious. Paul George needs to get set up more. He can do ISO every once in a while, but during the playoffs, they need a setup, man.
Remember, Dwight Howard was the man in Orlando, just like Paul George was the man in Indiana. He wanted to leave. He goes to L.A., he ends up going to Houston, and then before long, he's a journeyman, Washington, Charlotte, etc. Because the star that he once was, he was no more.
Now, that's very disrespectful to Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard led a team to a NBA Finals. That's very disrespectful. Paul George has done nothing even close to that.
And so because of that, everybody says they harken back to that. He should have never left Orlando. That was an ideal situation for him. They built the franchise around him, even though he didn't win the chip. They got to the finals in 2009. And now Dwight Howard is a role player, even though I think he's doing an exceptional job in L.A. in a reserve role. And I think he's going to.
Well, the game passed him by. You know, the game changed and it doesn't really favor his position. But the game right now favors Paul George's position. So what's his excuse? At the same time, like I said, Dwight Howard, man, he's a Hall of Famer for sure. Because you look at that 2009 Orlando Magic team, they got past LeBron James, that Boston Celtics team that was coming off that championship. Dwight Howard led that team, and defensively, he was a monster. Paul George has never really done anything against players against that caliber. I mean, he lost to, Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs and Damian Lillard when, Damian Lillard the year before almost got swept by the Pelicans. Like, come on, man.
Play a big role in this series along with JaVale McGee and Anthony Davis, triple teaming, basically throwing a three-headed monster at Jokic on the defensive side of the floor. But in the end, what it comes down to is that if you're Paul George, okay, you win Indiana, then you win OKC. Now you're in L.A. with the Clippers. And Max just said in order for this team to get the parts that it needs, even though I don't agree with you, you're talking about how you'd have to move Paul George in order to do that. So I think all of those things elevates the level of incentive. I think you keep the Clippers as is, stand pat. They were embarrassed. They're highly motivated. You anticipate that the pandemic won't stall next season, that you'll move full steam ahead. And I think you keep them together for one last run. Remember, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, 2-1. 2 years with a third-year option for each player. They could have signed for a 4-year deal or whatever. Neither of them did it. They can opt out after this upcoming season.
Which they probably most likely won't. The money is going to drop because of the fans not being guaranteed to be there in attendance. So the money's going to drop. So these guys are going to opt in and try to keep their current rates. But going back to Paul George, I believe a lot of us, man, we just fell in love with that potential that he had, I believe, in 2010 going up against Miami, where, he gave them a lot of issues. But other than that, Paul George just really hasn't been the same since. And Steve Ballmer, they're going to have to end up keeping Paul George because right now his value is too low and they traded a bunch of picks for him. I mean, they're kind of stuck right now.
This season could be on the line. If you're Ballmer, I think you give everybody one more shot, letting them know I will clean house in a heartbeat, and y'all will be gone from Tinseltown if y'all don't get it done next season. I keep them together.
Couple things. Paul George and Dwight Howard, to me, are very different. I understand you mean bouncing from team to team, but Paul George is a guy without
that's all I was talking about.
His game. He's
that's
such
all I
a
meant.
Well-rounded. He's such a well-rounded player. He's balled wherever he's been. The issue is he's miscast as a centerpiece. He's really what Paul George is best, as we see in the playoffs, is a top-notch kind of complementary player. But maybe
the best we've seen him in playoffs, once again, was that series against LeBron James in Miami. I believe in that first year. Either they went to game 6 or 7. But Paul George, or it might have even been 2 years in a row. He gave LeBron a lot of issues. That's where Paul George's stars started rising. And he even eliminated Carmelo Anthony and the Knicks in the playoffs, I believe, in 2012. So that's where people got in their mind that Paul George is some sort of guy that's going to lead you to some sort of playoff hope.
Not the second most important player on the team, even when it matters most. Whereas Dwight Howard was much more one-dimensional. And as the league changed, it really didn't favor the way he played. I understand what you mean, though, bouncing around. But I think Paul George's intrinsic, not only ability, but well-rounded game will keep him as a very valuable player for a while, right? Whether or not he's really a guy you can rely on under pressure. In terms of the Clippers' motivation, yes, they will be highly motivated. But what you noticed about their offense was they didn't really have a creator. Who creates the offense? Really, it's Kawhi Leonard. When he draws, he's become a much better passer, and that's the guy who really you run the offense through. But is Kawhi best used that way, in fact? Or should you get a more traditional ball handler like Drew Holiday, who can play off the ball also, obviously, who can shoot, who can defend, who steps up big time?
Or a guy like Kyle Lowry, man. Kyle Lowry's gonna have he's gonna be under a 1-year deal right now. Like he's approaching his final year. Toronto might end up, signing Fred VanVleet and then getting rid of, trading Lowry. So that could be opportunity for the Clippers to get him on a 1 year. But the Clippers don't need a top tier point guard. They just need someone to control the pace and set guys up
under pressure. And in order to get a guy like that, I agree, you're best off keeping Kawhi and Paul George. But then the question becomes that entire supporting cast. Like if I asked you, Stephen A., if you had to move Montrezl Harrell and Patrick Beverley, would you do it for as I mentioned, Lou Williams?
They're not in position to move Montrezl Harrell. It's Montrezl Harrell's choice to re-sign with the Clippers or not. I believe he's an unrestricted free agent. He's getting paid $6 million right now. He's unrestricted.
For Drew Holiday, I would. What if you had to also get rid of Lou Williams? Like, in other words, what if you had to give everything you had except your centerpiece players for a guy like that? And then you try to fill in the blanks like the Lakers just did. The Clippers
He's under the assumption they're going to get something for Lou Williams. Lou Williams has been around the league for a long, long time. I mean, we're talking about early days in Allen Iverson's prime. He's been around. So I don't think they're going to get that much for him.
Be better off doing that. And by the way, no knock against Montrezl Harrell, who played poorly, but was completely outmatched by Jokic. Like, he's not in Jokic's class. There's nothing he can do with Jokic. It doesn't mean he's not a good player. He's a solid player. He's just not a star.
Well, thank you for that soliloquy. My retort would be this. 13 rebounds to 2 is a problem when you're looking for a new contract if you're Montrezl Harrell. That's number one. That's more important. That's most importantly to point out. And number two, what it really comes down to again is I am not saying that you couldn't do things to buffer your chances as a championship. What I'm saying is it's a long shot that you're going to be able to pull all of those things off. Do they have enough right now to win a title next year? Yes, they do. If they act like a team and come together and stop being prima donnas, yes, they could, and I think they would. I think they'd have
Paul
a great
George
shot.
under pressure?
And I would, if I'm Ballmer, I would try even Paul George under pressure. Yes, give him one last shot because we know that he has the requisite skills. If I'm Ballmer, I give them one last shot, and then that's it.
You have no choice on that. I mean, Ballmer is pretty much stuck. He gave away so many draft picks for Paul George. They went all in. They put all the chips in the table. That's why Steve Ballmer was so excited when he introduced Kawhi and Paul George. He had that extra energy. I mean, he knows what it is.
I wonder if Kawhi regrets his decision to leave Toronto. We'll see, guys.
I don't think he does at all. But the Clippers, it's just minor adjustments they can make. But they're definitely going to have to get someone to control the ball so they can control the pace and get a bit more serious about the game. These guys are just way too cocky for guys that haven't done anything, joking around like they already won the championship. And who knows, it may even be the bubble. You know, the bubble right now, there's a lot of guys, man, that's just balling out. There's no crowd. It's almost like summer league. Guys just ball, go to their hotel room, you know, probably watch film, talk to other guys on the team, and go right back on the court. There's no travel. So, you know, we've seen a lot of guys, man, come out of this bubble just balling out, dropping 40, 50 points. A lot of unusual shit, but it'll continue on in these next 2 rounds. So it is what it is. You guys stay safe. Until next time, peace.